Hello and welcome to Inside Iraq. I'm Jassim Azzawi. Iraq was once home to one of the world's oldest civilizations, but today its Human Development Index is worryingly low. Earlier this month, the United Nations held a roundtable debate to discuss key questions related to Iraq's human development, to establish where Iraq stands politically, socially and economically. The debate was not just a talking shop. Its recommendations will inform the United Nations' ongoing work in Iraq. So what was discussed? What were the recommendations? And how effective will the United Nations be in attempting to put theory into practice on the ground in Iraq?
Human development, according to the United Nations Development Programme, is about the opportunity to lead healthy lives, to make choices and to develop one's potential. A country's Human Development Index is a way of ranking how a country is performing and progressing. It is believed that Iraq's Human Development Index has seen a significant drop in the past 2 decades. Hardly surprising, given the sanctions imposed on Iraq throughout the 90s, the US-led invasion of 2003, and the subsequent war and insecurity that continues to affect daily life in Iraq. The Human Development Index is measured by a number of different factors. The most important are access to education and health services, political and cultural freedoms, safety and security, and the standard of living in a given country. A 2008 report on human development in Iraq stated that significant progress had been made on many of these points. The report suggested the page had been turned on the years of bloodshed and near anarchy. But for many Iraqis, their country is not out of the danger zone. For them, the goal isn't yet about expanding choices and developing potential, but it's all about security. The report's authors and experts met earlier this month at a roundtable discussion at the UNESCO headquarters in Paris. Talk in foreign capitals of an improvement in conditions in Iraq is one thing, but the harsh realities on the ground, inside Iraq itself, are another. Stephanie Dutzer for Inside Iraq.
To discuss the UN-commissioned Human Development Report in Iraq, I'm joined from Baghdad by Mahdi al-Hafedh, a former Iraqi planning minister and one of the participants in the Paris roundtable discussion. And from Washington by Stuart Bowen, the Special Inspector General for Iraq Reconstruction. And from London by Sami Ramadani, a senior lecturer of sociology from the London Metropolitan University. Gentlemen, welcome to Inside Iraq. Mahdi al-Hafedh, you participated in this UNESCO roundtable discussion in Paris, and the word progress was repeatedly mentioned by you as well as other participants, as well as the UNDP report. So what is the definition of progress when it comes to Iraq?
You see, actually, it is quite clear now. It is not easy to say this is a progress or not. The only thing which I can say is that the report was not only about the sustainable development in Iraq, but it was in general about the document itself. So that's why I think that this matter has to be defined in a very clear way. This is what I understand from the progress in the report.
If we tackle the political aspect, Mr. Bowen, and you are a seasoned politician, you know this is an election season in Iraq, so everybody's trying to say Iraq has left the woods, we are out of the tunnel, and progress is all over the place. You are a frequent visitor to Iraq. Your organization is sanctioned by the US Congress. You elevate a quarterly report to Congress. From what you've seen, and you were in Iraq recently, can you say progress is at hand?
Well, there is progress, but it is fragile. I was in Baghdad just over a month ago when the recent car bombings occurred. It reminded me of what I felt and saw in 2006 and 2007. Certainly one of the largest attacks in years in Iraq, very devastating on the ministries affected. And I think it's emblematic of the continuing challenges that the Iraqi security forces are going to face through this fall, through this very volatile election season.
And yet Sami Ramadani, with 2 power centers in Iraq, one in KRG and one in Baghdad, and the constant tension between the 2 regions, let alone between the parties, the most critical thing for the Iraqis' national reconciliations, and yet it is not even on the horizon.
It doesn't look like it. In fact, it's receding into the distance even further. And the two centers of power you mentioned are the two main centers of power. You could talk about even more centers of power. If you take the state of the country in general, you'll find really practically there is no such thing as a proper central government in Iraq, which has tremendous influence in the various regions. There is a state of disintegration in the country, I feel, administratively, which reflects itself on the economic, political, social levels. There is a degree of chaos which is escalating rather than improving in the country in general, Jassim.
And yet, Mahdi al-Hafedh, this period between now and the January election, when there is a general election, as well as once the American forces start pulling in mass, perhaps by summer of next year, is the most critical in the history of Iraq after 2003. As a politician and a member of the Iraqi list and a member of parliament, do you see Iraqi politicians and power leaders and elites coming together to solve the issues?
I don't think so, because the whole problem now in the country is depending on how the other forces be able to cooperate with the others. For the time being, I feel that there is a big problem now, and that's why I think it is still at the beginning, and I feel that this will not be suddenly happen unless there is something to create those who are well understand each other.
Stewart Bowen, what is needed to break this deadlock that Mahdi al-Hafedh alludes to?
Well, there are 4 issues that are confronting Iraq. They're not new ones, but they're very serious, and they threaten the state, and they impede progress. Security, services, corruption, and the Kurdish Arab problem. On security, the August attack is just the most serious evidence of what has been a gradually increasing spate of attacks, especially around Mosul and in the Kirkuk area in recent weeks. On services, I met with Deputy Prime Minister Asawi during my August trip, and he said that services, in his view, he's the director of services for the Iraqi government, are worse now than they've been since 2003. That's a very serious concern for the Iraqis across the country, especially regarding access to electricity. He said in Baghdad it's 1 to 2 to 3 hours a day. It's difficult to manage a business.
It makes you wonder, Stuart Bowen, whether it's lack of money, it's incompetence, or as you termed it once, this corruption which is eating the very fabric of Iraqi society as the second insurgency.
Yes. That is the third issue, corruption. And Mr. Asawi told me, as well as the members of the Council of Representatives who I met with on the Integrity Committee, those that work in the corruption-fighting organizations in Iraq, that corruption is endemic. It affects every ministry. And as Minister Baban, the Minister of Planning, told me at the end of last year, it's getting worse, and certainly is worse now than it has ever been. That, coupled together with Kurdish Arab conflicts in Iraq, I went to Sulaymaniyah during this August trip. I saw really an other Iraq, all the signs in Kurdish flags flying. For an Arab Iraqi to travel to Kurdistan, have to show papers at the Green Line. These are little-known facts that are evidence of I think, a deep fissure that needs reconciliation. And as was just said, that reconciliation is slow in coming.
Sami Ramadani, listening to the two gentlemen, that must send shudders into your back.
Well, I think they are underestimating the problems. In fact, Jassim, I think they are even worse. I mean, Stewart Bowen, for example, called them four problems. I see them as consequences. They might be problems in themselves now, and they are obviously the 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 main reasons for what is going on. But ultimately, all these problems and Stewart alluded to some of them, are consequences, and they are consequences of the sanctions regime, 13 years of sanctions, and the occupation of Iraq. The United States, having failed to control Iraq, relied on all manner of politicians who are self-seeking. Their political forces do not have genuine popular base in the country, and they rely on clans, on cliques, and nepotism is a consequence as well. Corruption becomes a parallel. Corruption runs parallel to the fact that the United States increasingly relied on political figures and political forces which acquiesced with the occupation. And by the way, Jassim, when we talk about services, we're talking about clean water. Clean water doesn't exist for most of the population now. Open sewers in the streets. I don't know if Stewart managed to visit some of the streets in Baghdad or the provinces, and he would see the level of misery is unbelievable. The unemployment. Half of Iraq's doctors
As a matter of fact, Sami Ramadani, some of the people that have visited Iraq recently, I don't know whether it's their exaggeration, but the way they termed it, they said it's hell on earth. But Mahdi al-Hafedh, let me go on a limb and let me point a finger at perhaps at the very cause of all this, and correct me if I am wrong. Is it the sectarian quota system that is ruling Iraq under the facade of democracy is the mother of all problems?
Yes, it is. One of the reasons for that is that sectarianism has played a big role. And in my opinion, this was one of the reasons for this. I think that unless there is some measures to be taken, the problem will continue. And then in the meantime...
What measure? Like what? Like what? I mean, the Iraqi government, yes, including the Prime Minister, is impotent in throwing anybody behind bars for stealing billions of dollars. So what is it needed? I mean, al-Maliki himself, he says, I cannot prosecute anybody.
Yes, this is true. I mean, al-Maliki is one person, although he is the most important person in the government, but there are several powers inside the government. You cannot speak anything now about Kurdistan. You cannot speak anything about the ministries where the other ministers from this or that group are ruling. In my opinion, that this has to be taken into consideration, and this cannot be solved until the election takes place in January next year.
Stewart Bowen, this is not the plan before 2003 when the Americans went in and they thought they were going to instill democracy in Iraq. When members of Congress and the Senate, they talk to you and you tell them and you portray this bleak picture, what do they say?
Well, there is still a great concern about the need for more progress in Iraq, just as so much is changing. This has been a year of fundamental change. June 30th of this year was a significant date in the history of modern Iraq. It required U.S. forces to move out of the cities, out of urban areas, and the security agreement now requires any operation to be coordinated and really partnered with Iraqi forces. This has fundamentally changed the nature of security operations across Iraq. Whether the Iraqi forces are truly ready to shoulder the full burden
shaking your head, Sami Ramadani.
I am actually, because I don't think the U.S. forces have really withdrawn from the major cities. I mean, Iraqis tell me that it's a facade, really. I mean, the U.S. forces are still strongly present in Mosul, in Diyala, in Baghdad, in Hilla, Babylon, and so on and so forth. They have replaced the British bases in the south.
These were the exceptions, Sami Ramadani, they made to SOFA. I think it was with the consent of the Iraqi government when they came to the conclusion that without U.S. forces, all hell will break loose, especially when we saw the confrontation between the Peshmerga and the Iraqi army. And that is something has been put off for a while, Stewart Bowen, this confrontation between the capability and the authorization of the Iraqi army to go to any part of Iraq has been simply just postponed for a time being, isn't it?
I think that gets back to reconciliation and rule of law, the two preconditions for democracy, for the tools of democracy to work in Iraq. Dr. Omar, a Kurd who sits in the Council of Representatives as a member of the Integrity Committee, told me that he is gravely concerned about the possibility of progress regarding democracy in the government of Iraq because of the stasis regarding reconciliation, in fact, the regression on that front. And that is an essential element along with to ensure that a fair imposition of the rule of law is achieved, which a crucial building block to an effective democracy.
Sami Ramadani, this lack of democracy and rule of law, as Stewart puts it, is not limited to Baghdad, is it? The KRG, I mean, if you talk to the Kurdistan resistance and we talk to the politicians who believe that two families, the Talabani and Barzani, basically they just rule the north. They are no different than Baghdad.
Absolutely, and I talk with a lot of Kurdish friends who tell me that the levels of corruption in Kurdistan are as high as in the south. The security situation is better, but when it comes to corruption, lack of services and so on, the bulk of the population is suffering there, and you can see it in the rising levels of protests in Sulaimaniya and the rest. And there are some serious corruption issues. People are getting gradually squeezed into a corner in terms of threats to their lives and so on. Opposition and large areas of Kurdistan is quite a risky business. And as far as the general law picture, I mean, Maliki talks about enforcing the law and state of law. It is really laughable. The Integrity Committee that Stewart mentioned pinpointed, for example, the Ministry of Trade being one of the most corrupt. They are putting their hands into the question of rations, you know, the hundreds of millions of pounds of rations that have disappeared. They are on public sale in Sharjah and markets in Baghdad. The food that's supposed to go in rations to the poor families is being sold by the Ministry of Trade into the market. The Integrity Committee sent some police to the Ministry of Trade to arrest the two brothers of the Minister of Trade in there. And like a Mickey Mouse film, they were shot at from inside the Ministry of Trade, and the brothers of the minister escaped the building.
Let's see if we can change that discussion just a little bit, Stewart Bowen. Let's look on the bright side. There are almost 4 million Iraqis. The majority of them are professionals and high caliber, well-educated, languishing in Jordan, in Syria and other countries. Many people say you will know Iraq has gone through the recovery and the picture becomes a little bit better when those 4 million will return to Iraq in order to participate in the reconstruction. Does Iraq right now have either the political will or the capacity to absorb 4 million to come back and participate in the reconstruction?
Not in one instance, but over time that capacity needs to be developed, and that is the focus of the continuing U.S. investment in Iraq, capacity building. And there has been over the last 18 months, since security achievements of the surge have become evident, a gradual return of many Iraqis who had been in exile in both Jordan and Syria and elsewhere. But many are still waiting for signs that reconciliation is truly taking hold. And we keep coming back to that point, but we do so because it is the essential premise for, I think, long-term success and peace in Iraq, the reconciliation between Kurds and Arabs, between Shia and Sunni, and among the many fractions of political parties that have developed in the course of this year.
Mahdi al-Hafedh, will they have to wait long, many years, or will things change after the January election?
I don't think there will be any change from now until the election, because in my opinion the election will be some sort of a change in the country that will help the others to think about the future. in my opinion, I think that will not be easily to happen unless there is something miracle to help them.
I share his opinion, Sami Ramadani, when I listen to a senior advisor to al-Maliki when he says we have created a balance of terror in Baghdad, meaning to say between the Shiites and the Sunnis. When you talk in that terminology, the country has no chance whatsoever, does it?
It's quite frightening, actually, if officials talk in that language. But Jassim, I don't think that the so-called balance of terror runs in the streets as such. Amongst ordinary Iraqis in the street, everybody I talk to tells me that the sectarianism does not run deep into the streets. Sectarianism is at a higher level, at the official level, at the security forces level, at key power centers in the country. Yes, there is serious sectarianism there, and that sometimes filters through, of course. But in the streets, whether it's amongst Kurds, Arabs, amongst Shia, Sunni, Christians, it is quite noticeable that there isn't this gulf within the population amongst the communities in the streets. And in terms of terror, you reminded me actually, because I was watching Muntadhar al-Zaidi, the shoe thrower who threw his shoe at Bush. He was describing the most horrific torture he was under. Here is a famous person, the whole world was watching him, and Maliki's guards, and later on the so-called Baghdad brigade that Maliki runs, were actually torturing the guy. What sort of democracy, a state of
you
law
asked the question.
There are many thousands of prisoners who are completely innocent in prison. They have not been charged with anything. They are languishing in there without being charged. We're talking about
Sami Ramadani, you asked
really
a very critical question. Let me close with Stewart Bowen. He said the building block of Iraq, and that is the individuals, they don't have sectarian running in their blood, but the political elite and the political parties are the cause of problems. Stuart Bowen, your last comment.
Well, I think that, again, if reconciliation at the high levels is essential to ensure that this campaign season can unfold in a reasonable, peaceful fashion, that the elections come off as well as last January's elections did. And you want to talk about a sign of progress. Last January's elections, I think, evidenced some. There was significant turnover at the provincial council level, and the elections were held largely without incidents. But these are huge obstacles, and I guess the word that I will use is progress, yes, but fragile progress, and that the security issue and the services issue both remain enormous matters of concern for all Iraqis, and corruption remains the second insurgency.
On that cautious optimism, Stewart Bowen, Sami Ramadani, Mahdi al-Hafedh, gentlemen, thank you for being guests on Inside Iraq.
Thank you.
To watch the show online, please go to aljazeera.net/English. We have reached the end of this show. Join me next week when we take another look inside Iraq. Until then, have a great week.